Welcome to the On Your Mind podcast, where we are changing the mental health narrative, bringing hope and solutions. Here's your host, Timothy J. Hayes, psychologist.
Gail Brenner, PhD, is a clinical psychologist, author, and speaker with a passion for conscious living. She is an expert in healing from early trauma, and she's the author of the award-winning book, The End of Self-Help: Discovering Peace and Happiness Right at the Heart of Your Messy, Scary, Brilliant Life. Well, so Gail, welcome. Thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, I'm excited to be able to share with our audience about your book, and I wonder if you could start off by telling us a little bit about what brought you to write this book and what drives your passion for the content of it.
That's a big question. The book is called The End of Self-Help, and I debated about the title, and I know it's a bit radical, but I thought that it's very appropriate for the message that I want to get across to people, which is in the self-help industry, we're fed the message that there's something wrong with us. So we need to improve, we need to help ourselves, we need to find something that we're lacking, and so that we're better or feel better, or we're more successful. And my perspective is completely different than that. It's an invitation for people to turn their attention inward toward themselves. So we turn inward toward ourselves to realize, ultimately, we investigate, and we realize that everything that we want is already here. It's a matter of realizing that. And so it's a matter of uncovering our true essence, or our natural self, or our natural passion or purpose, not to look for it from the outside because we're broken in some way. So, when I made that discovery on my own and was understanding my own suffering and my own direct experience and understanding why things in life didn't feel so good for me, that set me on a long path to figure out, how do I be happy in my life? That was the question I was posing to myself and exploring. And I know a whole lot more about that now. And I'm passionate about it, and passionate about the possibility of living fully and alive and connected and present and really here with what's happening in the moment. And I'm excited to bring that to other people.
So how do you help somebody who is convinced that they're damaged or broken, at least begin to explore your perspective?
Well, I don't try to convince them that they're not, but my first question would be to really unpack what that means to them. Like when someone says to me, I feel broken or I feel depressed, I really want to know what they're thinking, what emotions they're having, and how they feel in their bodies. What are the bodily sensations that feed into their emotions? And then we begin to break it down, what is it about their present moment experience that's making them suffer, that's making them give themselves the label of I'm wounded or there's something wrong with me. So it's about looking at what's arising in them in the present moment, and then we can work with that.
So once somebody's willing to start questioning a conclusion that they're damaged or broken, and you help them begin to explore what it is they're actually feeling, then what?
Then that's a part of anyone's experience. We can look at our thoughts, and we can look at our, the feelings that are arising. We also have senses. We can feel things. We can, look at things outside or inside or ourselves. We have such great capacities with our mind and our awareness that's way beyond those limited patterns of not feeling good about ourselves, of, our human suffering, our, patterns and programmed ways that we make ourselves suffer. Not in any way to overlook that, because those need our compassion and our love and understanding. And it's possible, even with that, to open up to all of the what's here in the present and include that as well. So that's the direction of being able to be happy and relaxed in our lives.
So what was your path to come to this kind of a realization?
Well, I started with suffering, just like most people do. And I had gone to psychotherapy for probably, I think it was more than 15 years. And when I look back at that, and I'm a psychologist, so when I look back at that now, I didn't get very much benefit from that. But what really changed things for me was when I started meditating. And that was also the beginning of my spiritual path. And so I would sit and meditate, and in that meditation, be able to watch my experience. So I saw just so much negative thinking about myself and about other people. I didn't trust the world, and that was showing up in my beliefs. And there were a lot of feelings as well. And for me, it was mostly fear. And it was just this gigantic insight for me to realize that there was so much negative thinking in my mind and so much fear. And that's how I was living according to all of that, because I didn't realize it was there. And then once I realized it, I was able to have some space around all of it and find different tools and skills and ways to be more in the present and not to believe. As soon as I saw that all of that stuff was going on, I said, there has to be another way here.
And so what are tools or skills to be more in the present, as you say?
Yeah. Well, one that I use with people a lot is very simple, and it's the breath. So you don't have to do a big formal meditation practice. Some people like that, and I find that valuable, but it's not necessary, and lots of people don't like that, and that's fine. But everybody knows how to take a breath, a relaxing breath. So to, when we're caught up, and we all get caught up, we get stressed about things, we get angry at someone, we feel badly about ourselves, we get stuck in these stories that define us and that create our sense of reality. And it's always possible just with a breath to be able to take a pause, to find our way back to the present moment, to be able to look clearly rather than involved in all that thought process, to be able to say, what am I thinking right now? Is that logical in this situation? Is it helping me or hurting me? And we get the option of being able to choose to how we want to be in the moment. And one way into that openness of having choice is to just take a breath and relax and just stop everything for a second and get a new perspective and do a reset so that we can see what it is that we really want here.
So it's a real good thing. Start with the breath, get centered in the moment, and then what? What other tools or techniques do you offer for somebody who's recognized, wow, they've got a lot of negative content going on?
Yeah. So it's really helpful to look at the relationship that we have with those thoughts. So, for example, myself, before I recognized all that negative thinking, I was living according to that. So the relationship that I had with all of that thinking is that I 100% believed it. I believed the world wasn't safe. I believed I needed to contract to protect myself. And some people believe they're not good enough, or they live in shame, or, very difficult feelings that they're holding, because the feelings relate to these stories that we tell ourselves. So first is to recognize that this is the thinking that's going on, and then to question our relationship with that thinking. So once we have the awareness that there's so much negative thinking going on, we can begin to question and inquire, is this true? Is this something that's helping me? Can I get by without believing all this stuff? And it involves questioning and inquiring and experimenting with something new. And in addition to that, when we recognize that so much thinking is going on, and it's usually in some kind of pattern that we're used to thinking, when we recognize that, it uncovers certain emotions that have probably been living in us for a very long time, because that's what's behind this kind of repetitive thinking. We're feeling grief about what happened in our childhood, or we hold a lot of fear. We feel sad. There's anger for some people. And underneath the thinking is all of that feeling that's also here, whether we recognize it or not. And so we can learn how to be with those feelings in a loving and compassionate and kind way. And my experience with myself and people I work with is that changes everything. When we're able to bring kindness toward ourselves, when we feel shame and when we feel anxious, and instead of going into a negative thought pattern like, oh no, not that again, or I got to get rid of this, or this is horrible, or there's something wrong with me, we can just like take a breath, come back to ourselves, and be very kind for the feelings and the reactions that we become aware of.
Yeah, I think I remember listening to an interview with Sylvia Boorstein, and she was asked about this part in her book where whenever she has a negative thought or emotion, she puts her hand over her heart space and says, Sylvia, sweetheart, you're in pain.
Yeah.
Take a few deep breaths, calm down, then we'll look at what's going on, and then we'll decide what to do. But for now, Timmy, sweetheart, you're in pain.
Yeah.
And it really helped move my work personally to the next level when I trained myself to catch the negative and move over to the being gentle.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, these feelings that arise, it's a human thing to feel, sad or anger or fear. And that element of kindness, they're just visiting us. These are just feelings that arise, and they probably have reasons. We can figure that out. But the in the moment experience is the pain of having that feeling. And again, the question is, how do we relate to it when it's there? We can say, I hate this feeling. I want this to go away. If it would go away, everything would be okay. That's a resisting relationship with that feeling. But a welcoming and accepting and loving relationship with that feeling is to say, oh, hello, you're here, come in, I'll make space for you while you're here, and not to have that resistance and pushing against it.
And how do you feel about the perspective that says that these energies that we call emotion are just energies and they have information for us?
They do have information. I mean, we can certainly take a look at what these emotions are telling us. Like, for example, fear is an example of that. Like, is there actually something to be afraid of, or is there actually something that needs to be done? And if there is, that's great. Just fear is an example. Most times it's just kind of spinning and repetitive and it comes from a more primitive part of the brain, and it's just a habit. And we can learn that too. We go, there's the habit of fear. I feel that. And I also find that it's super useful to be aware of how emotions show up in the body. So in my work, I include the attention to the body a lot because it really matters. When these emotions get lodged into our bodies, it happens when we're young, and for many of us before we have language. So the first experience we have of an emotion is like a physical contraction or tension or panic or something like that, and it's very physical. If you take a look at an infant, they can't really process information. They're just all physical. And if we don't get a chance in our childhoods to be able to resolve and digest all of that, then those feelings get lodged in the body. So it's super important to always bring attention into the body and open to that part of the emotion as well.
And do you have any movements or exercises that you work with people to help them get in touch with the somatic part of their emotional experience and the connection to the thought structure that's sometimes they're just conditioned responses?
Totally. They are totally conditioned responses. And many of us are in our heads. We are blessed and cursed as humans with a lot of thinking capacity. So, it makes us do amazing things in the world, and it makes us get very stuck in our thinking. And when we're stuck in our thinking, we're missing what's happening in the rest of the body. So many people, when we first start working together, they'll realize that they haven't been paying any attention to their body. Maybe they've even been holding their breath and they don't realize it. So our attention is sort of up here, with the head gigantic, and then we're missing all this information that's here in the body. So very simply, the beginning is just to begin to pay attention to the body. And I do that often with a guided meditation or, just an invitation for people to do a body scan and just to notice, not to judge, not to figure anything out, not to find solutions to anything. It's not about that. It's just about finally being able to include what's happening in the body in our present moment experience, because it's here. It's just becoming aware of something that's already here anyway. And opening to that and allowing that. And the more that we bring our awareness into the body, there are layers and layers of emotion that are revealed. And it's liberating to illuminate the body with the light of this awareness and attention. So it frees up what's happening in the body.
So in that freeing up this energy, and allowing it to be there and getting feedback from it, is there something to do, or does the next step just come to me when I stay in touch with the body and the energy system?
Yeah, and these are beautiful questions. I love your interest in this. It comes, that's my experience, that when we stop trying to figure out, and that's in the mind, and that's, maybe from fear, I have to figure this out, or a sense of feeling of inadequacy. I need to make myself look good and be successful so that, I please other people and I feel okay. These are examples of conditioned patterns that don't use all of the information that we have available to us. And my experience is that when we relax away from all of this thinking and we open into the body and we just make a lot of space for sensations to come and energies to come and, whatever is there. And then maybe the body gets quiet and the mind gets quiet for some period of time. And we begin to have access to some deeper, and this is where the psychological meets the spiritual, we have access to another form of information where we just know something. And when we make this space for that kind of information to arise, we find that it does. Like I have the experience often when somebody's trying to make a decision, should I do this or should I do that? And, we can get in the pros and cons and write out the list and all of that. And I'll invite people to just contemplate one of the options and just really stay with that. And how does that feel in the body, and go deep with that, and then erase and then put the other option in. And how does that feel in the body? And 99% of the time right away, the answer comes. So there's a knowing in there that we have if we give the space for that to be shown.
What's your experience about how long it takes to help somebody develop that ability to listen to their own inner wisdom?
Some people, have easier access to it than others. So it's hard to give you a time amount. I mean, some people have a lot of layers on top of that. And, if we mention the phrase inner wisdom, they just have no idea what that is. They're so used to just going out in the world and trying to stay safe and trying to keep functional. And, they're not paying any attention to other sources of information. So it might take time to go through the layers and learn how to relate to those ways that we suffer. And eventually there's more space to be found. And people, if they stick with it, they will find that.
Well, I like the way you talk about that, as some people have so many more layers. So it's not a lack of ability or skill so much as it is there might be this habit pattern of the negative thinking that's layered deeper, has more emotional intensity behind it. So it might take me more time to practice to get through it. But essentially, I think what you're saying is everybody has that capacity.
That's absolutely the case. Everybody has that capacity because it's our true nature. It's who we are at the core, beyond any of our ideas about ourselves. So yes, we can, we all have access. We all have the potential to have access to that.
So I wonder if you could share with me how you work with somebody who has one of the more common difficulties that I see in people, which is this really low self-esteem. Mm-hmm. How do you use what we're talking about here so far to help somebody who's presenting issue is that?
Yeah. And it's we're going through a pandemic, and it's a pandemic of low self-esteem, personal inadequacy, it's very, very common in our culture, unfortunately. And so it's about unwinding. The way to begin to work with that is to unwind, like, what is happening in my present moment experience that's making me say I'm worthless or I have, low self-esteem. So it's just with great curiosity looking in, like, what are the thoughts that are coming? What are the beliefs that I learned in my childhood? We don't come into the world thinking we're worthless. So we have to kind of figure out, how is it that I've come up with that belief about myself? And then, this can be potentially a very long process, for people to really, grieve what they might not have gotten in their childhood and identify that, and then begin to and feel all the feelings that come with that. And then ultimately begin to keep bringing themselves into the present moment. And one of the phrases I say with people, and I don't mean this like just blithely at all, but it's like to lose interest in your thinking. It's not the easiest thing to do, but if you keep working at it, you can realize, like, my thinking is really not helping me. And the thinking in someone with low self-esteem is the inner critic, self-judgment, there's something wrong with me, and that thought pattern, is people who have that can be super harsh and very hurtful. And to really begin to recognize, like, it's optional to think that, it doesn't actually define who I am. Yes, it's a habit of thinking. And yes, it might have served in my childhood and it got stuck in there and it keeps going. But at some point we go, you know what, that's old news. And when I look at my life now and I look at my capabilities, there's something more beginning to take shape. There's something new that's sprouting, that's bigger and more true and more aligned with our life and our passions and our aliveness and what we want for ourselves and our relationships. And we slowly begin to experiment. I use that word a lot with people, to experiment, like trying on something new, some new way of being that's not living according to that thought pattern of low self-esteem. That's a very short version. It's a big process, but it's like, I totally want to instill hope, because it's very possible to feel better about yourself and about yourself in your life.
So the working at, and that for a lot of people might end up being a longer process if they have a long history of feeling these negative self-judgments and low self-esteem. But what I'm hearing you say is, if a person gets grounded in their breath and then begins to question all of these old beliefs that lead to the negative experience within themselves and negative emotions, then eventually it kind of loosens its hold on them, that they can get some kind of a perspective from which they don't necessarily have to believe or act from their negative thoughts. So is there another major portion of your book, this End of Self-Help, that would be a next step from there?
Yes. So from there, when we begin to untangle our attention from these beliefs, and that was beautifully said, by the way, that we learn that like there's more space. Maybe we don't have to live according to this mindset. Then, so what we're doing, let's take someone who's really steeped in that mindset. They're bringing the past into the present. So they can't be fully open to what's possible and what's here and what's alive in the present moment because they're thinking about, feeling badly about themselves and stuck in the thoughts of self-criticism and worrying about what other people think of them. Like that's the reality. And, I've been there. Many of us know exactly what that's like. And when we're in that, it's kind of like a tunnel vision, like our view, our way of being in reality of our lives and like this moment reality is limited because we're so stuck in that thinking. It's really layered onto the present. But when that begins to release, there's more space and more openness and more availability to the unknown. So one of the things that comes up with people is when they get right to the edge of being able to question these mindsets, these very familiar mindsets, fear comes because their thinking is, well, if I don't have that, how am I supposed to be in the world? And then we get to not know and be open and explore and be in something new. And you can think of it as going from doing, we're doing our lives according to our belief system, to just being. And when we're being, we let ourselves be moved. We let ourselves be led into whatever we do. And that's, an example of this is people often ask, well, how do I find my passion in life? And my experience of that is you don't have to find your passion. You have to have the willingness to explore these old patterns that are limiting what's possible. And then there's space and what we're passionate about, what we love, what we feel moved to do, all of that has space to come. So when we stop bringing the past into the present, because of our very loving and kind and accepting investigation of these patterns, we're poised and ready to be open to what life wants to offer us. That's how I live. It's a very free way of being, and it's based on listening, like deep listening. Like I see myself as a servant of life. Whatever messages I get, I've learned to trust that inner voice, that inner knowing. And it doesn't come from my mind, like I don't decide, but it tells me and shows me, and it sometimes comes very strongly. So I know exactly what to do. And with that surrender to that voice and the allowing of that, there's a life that's lived in service and aliveness and connection, which is what we all want. And that's what's possible once we can begin to untangle these thought patterns that define us.
Yeah, I get the idea of clearing the path, clearing off the table before you start a new project kind of thing. I've got to clear away enough of that attachment to those old thoughts in order for this space to be there for that inner knowing to surface, or for me to calm down enough that I can pay attention to that inner knowing. Some call it that still small voice. It's like a whisper in the beginning.
Gotcha.
One of the things that really helped me was in looking at the question of, so how do I know if it's my, conscious logical mind or my ego or this inner voice? And the answer I got was, well, when it's the inner voice, I will always feel calm. Mm-hmm. And if I have a fear, if I've got a confusion, if I've got an anger, it's not my inner voice talking.
Yeah, that's beautiful to know that, to recognize that. Yeah, because this voice doesn't come from fear. It doesn't come from anger and resistance. It just kind of it just shows itself. Yeah.
And when you were talking earlier, you said we bring the past with us into the present. It reminded me of David Whyte, the poet, who said, the Irish have a saying about the past. The thing about the past is it's not the past, which to me meant exactly what you were talking about. I bring it with me into this moment. If I'm remembering the past, I'm giving it its life right now. And it is that focus on those thoughts and memories and energies that's keeping me from being awake and aware in the moment.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, that's beautifully said. That there is no past. It's just it's finished. There's memory and there's emotional memory, and we can tell the story, but we're doing that right now. And what we feel right now. And what we think and remember, we're doing that right now. And that's great news, because that says we can do something about it. We can learn a new relationship with these thoughts and feelings. We can disempower them by investigating and by questioning and experimenting outside of what they tell us about ourselves. And I find that very exciting.
Yeah, it's echoing in my head. I think one of his other quotes was, sometimes it takes the dark and the quiet of our aloneness to realize that anything that does not bring us fully alive is too small for us.
That's beautiful. Everything that doesn't bring us fully alive is too small. That's a scary thought for a lot of people. Like, how big is that, But, when we stop limiting ourselves by our thought process, anything is possible. It's creativity. There's also space for creativity and inspiration and excitement, and not necessarily that you do some gigantic thing that totally changes the world, but to be in your relationships in a fresh way, to be alive with your family and your friends and nature and whatever you're doing.
And to get there, in that quote, he's basically saying the same thing you are, that I have to slow down and clear out the negative and have the darkness and the quiet of my own aloneness before I realize that there is something in here that wants to give me more than I've been experiencing so far, as I'm stuck in the loop of negative reactions from the past.
And we've been overlooking that. That's right. Yeah. And I love the slowing down part, because my experience is that's really necessary. Our culture moves pretty fast, and it's also pretty distracted. We're on phones, have all kinds of media and that attract our attention. And, it's a bit anti-cultural, counterculture to slow down, to not pick up the phone, to, decide you're going to have a day off of, all media. These are radical things in our culture today, but they're so nourishing and give us the space to do this work if there's work to be done, or give us the space to just enjoy things as they are without being distracted by all that input.
Well, and the thing I like about your book and the premises in it is that you give people some sense of where to start with the tools. Because I've dealt with a lot of people. I have some friends that are so frantically running from what's inside them that they will not allow any downtime. They fill every waking minute, and they get irritated if somebody cancels on them, and they scramble to put another activity in that place. So that if you've got a book like yours that helps people start to take a look at how to deal with what comes up when you have a free time, or if you, God forbid, you choose to slow down, then it's an empowering thing rather than as a terrifying thing.
Yeah. And I also think it's important to acknowledge that it might be scary, because it's a bit into the unknown. If I'm not going to pick up my phone, what am I going to do? And then there might be boredom. And, I think we have a different kind of relationship with boredom in our culture than we used to. Like, we're afraid of it. And it's okay to be bored. It's okay to not know what to do next.
And I think it's important to be able to be gentle with myself if I'm afraid to slow down.
Exactly.
If I'm terrified at the thought of, letting myself go down the path of this conversation, to be gentle with myself about that, and to understand that at some level in my experience in the past, that's been a valid response.
Mhm.
And so I can go slow and explore it. I don't have to dive in and say, well, this is not a valid emotion. I can go back to the beginning and say, okay, I can welcome the emotion and ask it what information it has for me, and be in my breath and being gentle with myself through that process. I'm sure I'll make more progress that way.
Yeah. It's so beautiful. Everything is included with love and care and kindness. And, my life has changed as I've looked at everything from that perspective. And, the things we used to do when we were young, that we learned when we were young, that play out, in our patterns, they develop for a reason. In my upbringing, I learned to kind of go away and close off. And I could judge myself for that, but I've learned to be so incredibly compassionate for that young part of myself that came up with that as an adaptive strategy in the situation that I was in. And we all have that. And I've come to have great compassion for those patterns that come up that we kind of develop and get reinforced out of our childhoods. We're doing our absolute best in the moment, and they serve. And then eventually we grow, we develop, we have new experiences, and those patterns aren't serving anymore. They're old news. So that's when that spark comes to investigate, like, my life isn't working for me now. It was kind of working back then because we had a strategy that was appropriate. And now that strategy is limiting my growth. I want to blossom more, and I'm being held back. And that's a beautiful place to be, because we get to then inquire into what is it that's holding me back, and to be able to answer the call of that something bigger that wants to give birth in us.
Well, and you said a couple times there, some statement to the effect of, I'm doing the best that I can. Mm-hmm. And that's another tool that's really helped take my work to the next level, is to just take this lens that says everybody's doing the best they can in each moment with whatever resources they have. Yeah. And the more I put that lens on when I'm looking at anybody else, mm-hmm. eventually one day I wake up and realize, oh my gosh, I was doing the best I could mm-hmm. in that moment with my resources. And then I do the best I can until I learn better, and then I do better. And that aids that being gentle with myself.
I think that also helps in relationship, because when we can, it's a little bit more of an edge, but when we can have compassion for other people, that person was doing the best they could do in that situation. It's a stretch, but it's totally possible. And because it's true also. They weren't doing what was absolutely needed in the situation, but they were doing the best that they can. And that brings up this, this heart, this, surrender, this sense of compassion. And it's just kind of brings us into the acknowledgement of all that's involved in the human condition. And that's where we all meet. We all have our challenges. We all have our joys.
Well, and as I was saying, that filter that I put on, that everybody's doing the best they can, I have to use that with other people. Mm-hmm. I think about M. Scott Peck, and he wrote a few books. One of them was The People of the Lie, and he was trying to figure out, how do everyday regular people end up doing truly evil things? Mm-hmm. And the conclusion he drew, and his observations proved it out over and over again, is that only people who are running from their own internal pain and fear ever hurt anybody else, whether it's intentionally or inadvertently. So if I open myself to use that filter, even if somebody's doing something that's overtly nasty or insulting or intentionally hurtful, and I say, oh, they must be in an incredible amount of pain, and they're doing the best they can in this moment, I'll still duck, right? I'm not going to willingly take one in the face, but I don't have to have rage in response. I can have compassion. And if I do that enough for other people, I wake up one day and realize, oh, I don't need to beat myself up either for this thing I did that was silly in the past, etc.
And we stop taking personally what other people do.
Yeah, because it's never about you. It's always about whatever comes out of somebody's mouth is about them.
That's right.
Well, I looked at the time and I realized I wanted to ask, is there something about your book or your work or some projects or classes you're offering that we haven't even talked about yet?
I offer courses regularly. I'm finishing one up now. And it's about this intersection of spirituality and spiritual awakening and all that's possible when we bring our attention into the present moment. And then looking at these conditioned patterns and early trauma and how they developed early in our lives. So I love working mostly, I do individuals, but a lot in groups, because I find that the group is so powerful to do these deep investigations. We create very safe space together for these deep inner inquiries into what's happened to us and how we hold what's happened to us, so that there's this sense of ultimately of liberation, and we learn from each other. So I do a lot. I do groups, I do individual sessions, I'm still writing, and there's it's all on my website at Gail Brenner.
So are you doing virtual things? Are you doing online groups these days?
Yeah, at this point online. Yeah. I have done live things in the past, but everything's online at this point. Yeah. Which I love, because we get to come together from all corners of the globe, really. And, and there's so much like-mindedness and like-heartedness and desire. I think people have used this pandemic situation really well, some of us, to find groups and come together. And it's been beautiful to be a part of.
So it's gailbrenner.com.
Yeah. GailBrenner.com. And I have tons of content on there. And
now, do you sell the book through your website, or is that mostly through Amazon?
Amazon. Yeah.
And the title again?
The End of Self-Help. Discovering peace and happiness right at the heart of your messy, scary, brilliant life.
I didn't want to try that, because I would have gotten one or two of those messy, scary, brilliant things messed up, but I love that.
Yeah, it's supposed to portray this just humanness,
Yeah.
Human life is messy, and we can find peace and happiness, even including all the messiness.
Wonderful. Well, I greatly appreciate your taking the time to be with us today and sharing this with us. And I hope people take you up on the offer to go to gailbrenner.com and check out your offerings and read your book.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Gail Brenner, PhD, is a clinical psychologist, author, and speaker with a passion for conscious living. She is an expert in healing from early trauma, and she's the author of the award-winning book, The End of Self-Help, Discovering Peace and Happiness Right at the Heart of Your Messy, Scary, Brilliant Life. Gail brings to her work years of experience with individuals and groups, and is known for creating the safe space needed for inner exploration. Gail has special expertise in working with older adults and their families in the transitions of aging, death, and dying. She is also the author of Suffering is Optional, a spiritual guide to freedom from self-judgment and feelings of inadequacy. For more, please visit gailbrenner.com, GailBrenner.com.
You've been listening to the On Your Mind podcast, offered by Journey's Dream, where we support people through mental health challenges to a place of true and lasting well-being. If you love our show, we invite you to visit onyourmindpodcast.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our helpful resources. Thank you for listening.